The Haunting of Sambuca. The nice town of Sambuca, nestled in the rolling hills of Sicily, seemed like the perfect place for the Russo family to start new. Antonio and Maria, along with their two children, Luca and Sofia, had moved into a charming apartment in the heart of the city. The building, with its old-world charm and historical architecture, seemed like a dream come true. However, it wasn't long before the dream turned into a nightmare. The first few days were uneventful, filled with the bustle of unpacking and settling in. Yet, as the novelty of their new home wore off, a creeping unease began to settle over the family. It started with small, almost imperceptible things. Maria would notice objects slightly out of place, a book moved from the shelf, or a chair pulled away from the table. Antonio dismissed it as the result of their chaotic move, but Maria couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. Then came the noises. Every night at precisely 3:33 a.m., a strange sound echoed through the apartment. It was a low, rhythmic thumping, like footsteps pacing back and forth. Antonio would get up to investigate, but he never found anything out of the ordinary. The noise stopped as suddenly as it started, leaving the family on edge and sleep-deprived. One evening, as the family gathered in the living room, the lights began to flicker. At first, it was a minor annoyance, but soon the lights started switching on and off rapidly. Antonio checked the electrical panel, but everything seemed in order. The unsettling flickering continued for several minutes before abruptly stopping, plunging the apartment into an eerie silence. The strangest incident happened one night, when Maria woke to find Luca's bed empty. Panicked, she rushed through the apartment searching for him. To her horror, she found him asleep on his mattress, which had somehow been moved to the front door. Luca had no memory of how he got there, and the door was still locked from the inside. The incident left the family deeply shaken. Desperate for answers, Antonio and Maria decided to speak with their neighbors. They learned that their apartment had a dark history. Years ago, a man named Giovanni had lived there. He was a recluse, rumored to have dabbled in the occult. Giovanni had died under mysterious circumstances, his body found lifeless in the very room that now belonged to Luca and Sofia. Since then, every tenant had reported strange occurrences before ultimately moving out. Chapter 2. The Street Awakening. Determined to protect their family, Antonio and Maria sought the help of Father Angelo, a local priest known for his work in exorcisms. Father Angelo agreed to bless the apartment, hoping to cleanse it of any lingering malevolent spirits. The ritual was intense, with prayers and holy water sprinkled throughout every room. As Father Angelo chanted, the temperature in the apartment seemed to drop, and a palpable tension filled the air. The blessing seemed to work, at least initially. The strange noises ceased, and the lights no longer flickered. The family began to relax, believing that the worst was behind them. However, their relief was short-lived. A week after the blessing, at exactly 3:33 a.m., the familiar thumping noise returned, louder and more insistent than before. One morning, after a particularly restless night, Maria awoke to a sense of dread. She felt a deep unease in her body, as if something dark and heavy was pressing down on her chest. Antonio mentioned feeling the same way, a strange sensation that he couldn't quite describe, like an invisible hand gripping his heart. They both decided it was time to leave the apartment for good. But before they could act on their decision, something even more terrifying happened. In the early hours of the morning, Maria awoke to a noise outside. She looked around the apartment and realized with a sinking feeling that Luca was not in his bed. She rushed to the front door, which was still locked, and flung it open, only to find Luca outside on the street, lying on his mattress. Luca was shivering, clutching his blanket, with tears streaming down his face. "Mama, I don't know how I got here," he sobbed. "I just woke up and I was outside." Antonio scooped Luca up, his face pale with fear and anger. "This is it," he said firmly. "We can't stay here another night." That day, the Russo family packed their belongings and moved to a temporary accommodation on the outskirts of Sambuca. However, the unease didn't entirely leave them. Each member of the family felt a lingering sense of being watched, a coldness that settled deep in their bones. Maria couldn't shake the feeling that something was still very wrong. She started researching the building and discovered a chilling pattern. Every family that had lived in their apartment, and indeed the entire building, had reported similar hauntings, strange noises, objects moving on their own, and most disturbingly, children found outside their apartments, unaware of how they got there. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, Maria contacted the local historical society. She learned that the building had been constructed on the site of an old monastery, which had burned down centuries ago. The monks who lived there were rumored to have practiced dark rituals, and many had perished in the fire. It was said that the spirits of the monks still haunted the grounds, trapped between worlds, seeking solace or revenge. Maria shuddered at the thought of these restless spirits reaching out to her family. She shared her findings with Antonio, who was equally horrified. Father Angelo, who had been supportive throughout their ordeal, offered a final piece of advice. Sometimes places are marked by the past, and no amount of blessing can change that. You must leave, but also find peace with what has happened. Only then can you truly move on. The Russos took his advice to heart. They found a new home far from Sambuca, in a modern apartment with no history of hauntings. Slowly, the feelings of unease began to fade. Luca and Sofia started sleeping through the night again, and the family began to heal from their traumatic experience. Yet even in their new home, the memory of the haunted apartment lingered. They spoke of it rarely, but when they did, it was with a mix of fear and relief. They knew they had escaped something truly sinister, and they were grateful to have each other. As for the old apartment building in Sambuca, it remained a place of whispers and shadows, its dark history continuing to haunt those who dared to live within its walls.